My name is Gary Thomas. I work in the film team at the British Council, and I'm a curator / producer of animation projects at an organisation imaginatively called Animate Projects. Our panel is sitting down there. I don't want them to crick their necks. We're each going to give a brief introduction. The session is about collaborations with filmmakers and musicians. It's of interest to the British Council. The British Council, in case you don't know, we're the UK's international cultural relations organisation. In the film team, one of the things we do is promote British filmmaking, films, film-related kind of projects internationally. We're led, I think it's fair to say, we're led by practice. We're not a funder. We don't initiate in that kind of way. And for the film team, being led by practice means we're increasingly engaged with moving image other than features and shorts. We're starting work on games, and film and music is a thing that we've been working on. We have our own film archive. It's short documentaries from the 40s, which were intended for an international audience to explain aspects of British life to the world. With the BFI, and some help from Google, I think, the archive was, I think it's 140 films, was digitized 4 years ago. As part of that online dissemination project, we commissioned John Aconfra, Penny Wilcock, and Mark Cousins to each make short films using that archive material. So earlier today we saw a picture of an audience with Mickey Mouse face masks on, and here's an audience of Chinese people that the British Council has helpfully given masks of a dead white male to which does make me a little, maybe I shouldn't, is this being recorded? About 4 years ago, we began presenting the BFI's 9 Hitchcock Silents around the world. There are various configurations, regular screenings with piano accompaniment, married prints with the newly commissioned scores, and presentations with live scores. Now and then we've done presentations in places like, I've never been to these places, Copacabana Beach. No, I didn't get that gig. Copacabana Beach and the Odessa Steps. We also show the films with newly commissioned scores ourselves, and at the Taiwan International Film Festival showed, I can't remember which film it was, but they showed the BFI film with a BFI commissioned score, and the next night they show the same film with a live, newly commissioned score from a Taiwanese composer. We've shown them around the world. That picture was at Shanghai Film Festival. We showed all 9 films. This is the film pianist John Sweeney being mobbed by the audience. I'm not sure that's a common occurrence for people who play the piano for silent film. The popular and creative success of those international presentations prompted me to have a conversation with a colleague in our music team, and thinking about the many other examples, the variety of projects in different contexts, of kind of film, archive, music, collaborations, liveness, and the particular skills, creative and practical considerations involved in their delivery. So we've now got an ongoing film and music project. When I say it's ongoing, we're carrying on having that conversation. And that program began with FamLab, a film archive music lab, working with the BFI, with Home in Manchester and PRSF Foundation, which brought together 16 artists and producers and musicians from 8 from East Asia and 8 from the UK, who spent a week immersed in a series of presentations, screenings, live performances and stuff. That's a picture of a panel. You're going to see a live version of that quite soon. And that's a bunch. Those are most of our FamLab delegates. I'm also a person in my own right, a producer and curator of experimental projects. So I want to just say something about a project that we're working on at Animate, which is pertinent to the subject. Either at the last This Way Up or the one before, there was a panel on alternative content, and I went along. I come from a kind of avant-garde film background, so I went along to that session very excitedly. I need to find out that it was about opera, so I'm getting my own back, and we're working with London Sinfonietta with 4 artist animators to make animation, to make a film, not a film of it's a contemporary opera by George Benjamin and Martin Krim. It's not a film of the opera, it's film for the opera, and it will be a film. So sort of coming from where music film collaborations might generally begin with a film, this is a project that's beginning with the music itself. We're in development, but for me it's already flagged up how incredibly complex this kind of, how incredibly creatively complex a challenge film and music projects like this really are. As producers at Animate, we're used to brokering and interpreting between art and film and cinema, gallery, art and science, art and people. But I completely underestimated the challenges of a project where music and images interrelate. Things come up like the relative rhythms, the balance between what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Thinking about what's lost in a film presentation when the performers aren't present, what's lost with their acting, and what the animation needs to do to counter or replace or adapt to that. The need to tell a story, but not to merely illustrate. The need to evoke the psychology and politics of the opera. The need to give the music space, and it's a there are lots of words in the opera. The need to consider that text. And then I wrote, not to mention accommodating, respecting the opinions of the composer and writer, our co-producer, our potential co-commissioners, who all have valid and respected opinions. Virginia Heath, filmmaker, is up next, but first we're going to see a short clip from Scotland with Love.
No promise to be
So that was a clip from Scotland with Love, which was actually commissioned as a live event in the first place for the cultural festival alongside the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2014. So it started its life, with the intention of being a live event right from the beginning, with a live performance of the soundtrack. And it's been very much seen as a kind of poetic history from below, exploring 20th century identity in Scotland. And when I approached making the film, I was very much influenced by this quote from Ingmar Bergman, and just really wanted the film to be a really immersive experience. There's no narration, it's just the music and the images telling the story. And really relying on the wonderful way in which archive film takes you into a kind of dream world, I think, and working really incredibly closely with the King Creosote right from the beginning to make sure that the film and the music were created together. Basically, the whole process of marrying the sound and the music was very much something that was conceived between us right from the beginning. And as a lot of people have pointed out in a previous session that I was in and other sessions, when you collaborate with a composer, musician, then it brings a whole different audience to the film. And when we released the film, the fact that Kenny was on Domino Records, it was absolutely fantastic for us because they're a real machine in terms of publicity. So all the lovers of Kenny's music came to see the film in a way that they may not have done otherwise. And also the film introduced a lot of people to his music through another route. So it was a very, very fruitful collaboration. And as I was saying, this interplay of sound and image was just very much an ongoing process from the very first sketches of the music to my finding the very first images in the archive that I knew that I wanted to have in the film and showing them to Kenny, King Creosote, and seeing what that would inspire in him as a composer. So it was always backwards and forwards right through to the finishing of the music at Chem 19 Studios in Glasgow. And for me, as a film director, this experience of being so involved in creating the music was really, really wonderful, opening up of a new kind of way of working. That was just to talk about the kind of venues in which we were able to show the film because of the live performance element of it, which we wouldn't have been able to do if it was simply a film. So that we were in the Barbican in London, we were at Celtic Connections, we were at Six Musics Festival, we were at Kelvin Grove and on Glasgow Green for the Commonwealth Games. So all kinds of venues that were accessible to us in a way that they wouldn't have been if we didn't have this live music element to the film. And the other way in which we went out to the community with the film was through a tour around questions around national identity, which are really important, obviously, in 2014 in the summer. It was the year of the referendum. And so we went around the country with the film, and people came often in the audience. I'd ask them, had they already seen the film on television? And a lot of people put their hands up and said yes, but they wanted to come to a cinema and actually talk about the film and engage with each other around talking about these questions in this important year. And of course, the fact that Kenny came on the tour and was doing some songs from the film afterwards was a huge draw card as well. But we also replicated this in New Zealand. We did a whole national tour in New Zealand, obviously big Scottish diaspora there, and in Canada. So it was really interesting the way in which the music and film kind of brought new audiences. So that's From Scotland with Love, which has been, really this music and collaboration has been really, really wonderful in terms of pushing the film out there to new audiences. And on the back of that, I've been approached to do a film about about migration in Europe from 1945 till 2000, sort of second half of the 20th century. And this is funded by a European arts pan-European arts organisation, and was created for a big conference around the idea of imagining Europe, held in Utrecht. And this film is a whole other challenge in terms of finding a way of approaching it and potentially trying to reach audiences right across Europe on this incredibly important issue of migration. And the idea is to look back at migration in the 20th century, the different ways of it and so forth, to sort of throw some light on where we are at today. And there's all sorts of, I can only show a little bit from the beginning of the film, but in terms of how you approach that from the point of view of making the film and the score, in terms of all the different languages across Europe and the different cultures, is an incredible challenge, as you can imagine, but a really exciting one. And so I'm working now at the moment. I've made this a short 20-minute film, and we're now working to turn that into a feature-length project.
Thanks, Virginia. Next, Nigel Humberstone, who's musical program director for Sensoria Festival in Sheffield, and a musician in his own right, in a band. Are you a band?
Yes.
And is it in the nursery?
It is.
And is it with your brother?
Yeah.
Is it? Yes, I can Google. Thanks.
Thank you. I must say I'm looking forward to the We Are All Immigrants. It looks fantastic. But yeah, as Gary said, I'm essentially, well, at first I'm a musician. I've been a musician with my twin brother for the last 35 years. A band called In the Nursery, based in Sheffield. And we've been making music as a band, but also as a duo. We do, since 1996, we've been making music for silent films. So our first one was The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. We've now got 8 titles in our repertoire. We write a new soundtrack for classic silent films, and then we perform them live, and we've done it all over the world at film festivals and cinemas all across the world. So it's been a really fantastic experience. And as a composer, we've worked with archives. We've worked first with the BFI on a number of projects. One of the most memorable, which you'll probably be aware of, is the Mitchell & Kenyon collection. We worked on the DVD release, Electric Edwardians, and we wrote scores for 36 individual titles from the collection in the first release. And we found that a really rewarding experience. We always do when we're writing to film and image. We find that as a great source of inspiration as musicians, as creatives. But the Mitchell & Kenyon collection also was, well, we presented it live at the launch, but it's also sort of filtered through into other work that I've done at Sensoria. Sensoria is a music and film festival based in Sheffield, been going since 2008, so we celebrate our 10th edition next year. It's an annual festival, and we celebrate the intersection of music and film and all the various permutations that involves. So we do music documentaries, silent film screenings with new scores, unusual presentations in unusual locations, like we've done a film screening in an outdoor swimming pool, Lido, with an underwater sound system. We've done drive-in movies in the city centre of Sheffield. I'm going to be showing you a couple of promo trailers which we've just edited together, a selection of clips which are quite relevant to the archive element section of the work that we do at Sensoria. Some of the clips you can see here. The one on the far left was, again, from the Mitchell & Kenyon collection, which we presented in an old steelworks in the city centre. Tram ride through Sheffield, that went into some other works that we did, which I'll probably talk about later, or if I get a chance, I'll mention now. DJ Yoda working with hip-hop film archives. The one at the bottom, difficult to see, but it was an installation in a warehouse called Evangelist, about the evangelist Oral Roberts, and that the artists were working with an archive, and they presented it as a walk-through sound experience where you had the different rooms and found out more about this evangelist, one of the biggest evangelists in America. The top right is, again, the Mitchell & Kenyon collection. We chose a selection from the collection of pertinent titles which are relevant to Sheffield and the surrounding areas, so works in Rotherham, but particularly Weston Park in Sheffield was a place where the Victorians went to promenade, Edwardians I should say, not Victorians. And the building still exists, it's in the footage from 1900, 1903. We did a large-scale projection onto the side of Weston Park Gallery, and the audience stood in the park with wireless headphones on, and they had a choice of listening to either the newly commissioned scores. We put out an open call for submissions and commissioned 2 composers to write new pieces of music for these short clips. So they could listen to the soundtrack on Channel A, or they could flip over to Channel B and listen to the soundtrack or an audio commentary about the context of the films. But it was fascinating for the audience to just be there and see these ghostly figures from 100 years ago walking along the same stretch that they're being filmed on. And we even, in the centre of those 3 panels, there's a steps up to the gallery, and the projectionist opened up the steps so the figures in the films actually walked down the steps. It was quite magical. Also, another area of work we worked with at archives is in Sheffield at the university. There's a Barry Hines archive, and we worked with the academics there to when we were doing a screening of Threads, which many of you be aware was based in Sheffield about the post-apocalyptic results of a nuclear explosion. And we showed Threads using the original Betacam tapes in an amphitheatre overlooking the Sheffield station, railway station, with the city skyline and the city centre behind it. So people were watching the 40-foot screen projection, again using wireless headphones, because it worked best in that environment with nearby neighbours and people. And they could see events going on in the film with the actual locations that they were filmed at behind in the city of Sheffield. And also, of course, it was on quite a cold evening. We handed out these foil thermal blankets for everyone. We worked with the Showroom Cinema on this one. It was a great event. I think in the clip later on, you see another shot of an audience wearing masks. This time, they're wearing alien masks because it's part of the BFI's sci-fi season. And connected with the Threads screening, we also worked with commissioning an artist, Matt Stokes, who he did 2 films called, let me get this right, Smoky God. Yep, and there's just a short clip in the bottom right there. So he worked, again, it was post-apocalyptic. He worked with Barry Hines' archive and presented the installation at Site Gallery. Probably best if we just show the 2 clips if we can.
Thank you, Nigel. Alison Strauss is director of HipFest, the Hippodrome Silent Film Festival in Bowness.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks for showing that film. That's so inspiring. I really want to replicate something like that with the people walking in front of just recreating something from 100 years ago. The Bowness Fair films would be fantastic to rescreen in the streets of Bowness. But anyway, I'm the director of the Hippodrome Festival of Silent Cinema, and it's Scotland's first and only festival of silent film, and we started up in 2011, and we're just in preparation now for our 7th edition. And I thought the best thing to give you a flavour of what the festival's about would just be to show you a little 3-minute film that we've prepared earlier. So thanks, Ben. Ben's a star because we only sent him this last night.
Hi, my name's Thomas. We've both come to Bowness to see the Silent Film Festival.
Since it began in 2011, HipFest has established itself as an excellent, innovative and ambitious multi-art forms festival. I have experienced the wow factor.
The atmosphere is wonderful, the way in which it's been refurbished, and it really captures how cinema would have been years ago.
During this 4 or 5 day period, this cinema becomes what it was when it first started and will continue to be, which is a kind of not just a cinema of dreams, but a kind of theatre of dreams as well.
There's something about the silence, and then there's this added rush of having the live music with it that makes it just a live, special experience like no other, really.
Yes, it's a very warm atmosphere. Quite often you go to festivals that are either international festivals or community festivals, where it's just the local community, and this seems to have a nice balance of the local community and international guests.
Bowness is very nice, seemed quite sleepy kind of town. But now I've been to the Hippodrome, and I'm seeing that Edinburgh hasn't got all the culture. Bowness has got its own culture too, in this fabulous venue with a wonderful silent movie festival.
It does feel to me like you feel like the Bowness owns this festival. It's not just been plonked down here. It's actually growing out of Bowness, and it's just very special.
As ever, it's a highlight of the year. I can't wait to come back.
So I'll be the first to get in with this commonplace, but it is important to say that silent film, of course, was never silent. And we decided right from the outset that 2 things, that we were always going to present silent film with live music, and that we were going to aim to generate really high quality commissions, both with musicians who are experienced in composing for silent film, but also with musicians who hadn't worked in that field before. And I've done some of these slides to just give you an overview of some of the commissions that we've done, and I thought I'd try and talk about them really briefly in the context of the themes that we're going to be discussing today, but I reckon I'm going to go through super quick, because really it'd be really good to open this up into a discussion. So this is the film selected for tonight's screening, Wunder der Schöpfung, and I do urge you to sign up for it if you haven't already, and I'm not just saying that because I'm partial. It really will be, I think, your cinematic highlight of the year. And this was one of those projects that just felt right from the beginning. Stuart Brown and I knew we wanted to work together, and we were talking about films that could maybe work, and the musical backgrounds he had and the influences. And I just did some research and presented him with a choice of 3 films. I can't now remember what the other 2 were, but one of them was this one, Wunder der Schöpfung, about space. And he said straight away, that's the one that I want to do. One of the bands that I work with, one of the duos, is Herschel 36, and it's named after the star Herschel 36 and the astronomer. I thought, great, that makes it a perfect reason. Then he said, and by the way, my dad is the Astronomer Royal for Scotland. And so it was written in the stars. And also that was the year that Tim Peake was in space, and it was all about space. So in terms of the question today, what makes for successful marriage of film and music. I think that was some kind of fertile combination of zeitgeist and fate, and I don't really know how you replicate that. But in terms of challenges with this one of the challenges was trying to persuade the archive that restored this film that it was okay for us to commission a new score, because they'd done their restoration and they'd commissioned their new score and they were delighted with it, and it was with quite a traditional score by Alyosha and Sabrina Zimmerman, and that did take quite a lot of careful, delicate negotiation to persuade them that their new restoration was going to be in good hands with a new interpretation. And I'm so glad that we did, and in fact we just introduced that film to a whole new audience who would never have probably stomached it without that the bridge that was made by the musicians. This one, Moishi's Bagel, I heard them at a gig and really got the sense that their music was all about storytelling and that it would be great to pair them with a film. And the challenge with these guys was, with any commissioning of music, was to find, if you find a musician you want to work with, finding a film that they're going to want to live with for the next 4 months or so. I'm sure you'll have appreciated that if you've gone through the canon, and you need to not get sick of the film. And with a band, when you've got 6 band members, the ones who that I was dealing with, they said they loved the film that I'd chosen and that would work really well. But then when the whole band finally got around to watching the film that I'd selected, turned out that half of them hated it. And so I had to abandon that altogether. But the results was this choice of film, Salt for Spaghettia, which I think turned out to be really fruitful. And just working with this band for me was, like I say, another way to foster discovery with audiences, just tapping into that fan base that the musicians had already. And just helping people overcome, just getting to grips with something that's unfamiliar to them. And this is really one of my favourite commissions, really, the Film Explainer. And this was a successful collaboration between a storyteller and 2 musicians and HipFest and the National Library of Scotland's Moving Image Archive. And again, in terms of the discussion today, I think it's really important to talk about the importance of ideas and inspiration. And this came about partly from a novel that I read 25 years ago that some of you might know, called The Film Explainer, and also just from sitting in a theatre watching the Wee Stories Theatre Company do a piece about King Arthur, and just the germ of that idea and thinking about bringing together super talented artists with a new idea to recreate the lost art of film explaining and bringing in musicians to work with them. And I just think that if you are commissioning, just keeping engaging with as many different ideas as possible and experiencing as many different art forms as you can, and just stops you necessarily repeating what everyone else is doing, just germinating good ideas. And I'm just going to canter through some of the rest, and maybe if you want to ask us about any of these commissions in the discussion afterwards, you can. This is a highlight. This is when our film commission got selected by the Bologna Film Festival, Il Cinema Ritrovato. And not only that, our commission was screened in this wonderful outside piazza with a carbon arc lamp, and a magical experience even before the film starts rolling. Some of you might have seen Annie Laurie, just screened at the weekend here in Glasgow. Again, still the life of this ongoing, which is fantastic. And it's screened for the St Andrew's celebrations. Great work with schools and pairing, mentoring musicians is a big part of what we do. That happened with the Shona Mooney Commission for Annie Laurie, but it also happens here with schools, and that's a project that's been going since the festival started, and we've had many musicians come through the ranks and have gone on to further careers in composing, which is really exciting. And the Ozu silent film, and Jane Gardner and Hazel Morrison. Also, I didn't mention Sue Ali with a fantastic instrument called the musical saw, which is basically a saw that you bow. And this was a really rewarding commission. And I just thought I'd slap up there that we had some big exciting names come up to HipFest. So Mark Kermode basked outside the Hippodrome in the rain. And there's a little plug for our dates next year. And that's us. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I kind of cringe when chairs on panels say, "Oh, as we were talking in the bar last night." But anyway, Nigel, as we were talking in the bar last night, you suggested that one of my questions should be, what is archive? And I'd just like to extend that to the three of you and say, what is archive? But also, why work with archive?
Well, it seems that it's such a rich source of inspiration for content providers, festivals, and for musicians. I mean, as a musician myself, I don't think I would have continued in the way that I have without working with film, be it archive film or writing music, which I think it will be suitable for documentaries or film trailers, which it then gets sub-published for. So I don't know, when you say archive, people always think, oh, it's pre-sound, black and white, but I don't think it should be. I think it should be a lot more than that.
I think archives, people have got used to archives being raided for, documentary canters through a certain topic, and there's little clips that are taken out of context maybe, or little bits. But what I really like about, for example, the Newfound Sound project is that those are films that don't necessarily get the chance to have their moment up on the big screen, and just the shot light on them for their own sake, and the music there to be that bridge for the audience to kind of understand them on their own terms, really, rather than just being the background fodder to a documentary about something else. You know, how funny people were in the old days, kind of thing.
I mean, there's for their own sake, but Virginia, and that's simply presenting film unmediated in a way, but you're mediating the historic material that you're working with. So what respect or kind of moral obligations do you have when you're dealing with that material?
Well, I mean, for
moral obligations.
From Scotland with Love, I mean, I spent over 3 months in the Moving Image Archive of Scotland, which I think is their new name. And for me, it was a treasure trove of finding material which was, documentaries, family, home movies, fiction films that hadn't been very successful in their day, but actually had wonderful moments in them. Like, for example, in this little sequence I showed, the trains and the train driver and his lover or wife or whoever she is. That sequence is from a fiction film, and I just found it was wonderful in terms of trying to create a sort of poetic reflection on Scotland in the 20th century, to have this whole richness of different sources of archive to play with. One of my richest sources was from an Italian surrealist filmmaker, Enrico Coccozza, and I was able to use some little bits from his surrealist films, but also he'd filmed his whole family. There was a Coccozza family archive, and there was just absolutely amazing material in that he'd made available to the archive to use. So I think the joy of it is to find this material and piece it together in a different way, give it new meaning. I mean, some of the films that we used had incredibly sort of patronising voiceovers on them, sort of talking about like very sort of toffee English voices on these films about Scottish workers or whatever, and it's such a joy to strip those voices off and the music.
You should
and
see
just
some of the British Council films.
And give the archive a whole new life. It's a really lovely thing to do.
In a way, you're all reclaiming in a way,
and repositioning,
and reinvesting. Mm-hmm. What does that mean for your audiences?
Well, I think these kind of films with music soundtracks of whatever kind, I think they do open up a kind of space for audiences to bring their own kind of memories and thoughts into the cinema. That's very much the way that's the kind of feedback that we got, was because From Scotland with Love doesn't tell a chronological or traditional historical narrative. It's very thematically based, so that people had to actually engage with the material and sort of think about what it meant to them and so forth. And I found that we had really wonderful discussions afterwards about how people felt about the past that was being represented to them.
Well, and they're all engaged in kind of it's old, it's archive material. What you're presenting to the audience is quite sophisticated, experimental, innovative stuff, placing films in a very particular, showing threads is like an elaborate installation, site-specific installation work. And yet your audiences are ready for that.
I think it has to be said how much the music itself is important, and the sensitivity of the music to what you're working with, because maybe we've all experienced seeing film where the music hasn't been serving the film as well as it should. And it was so good to see that little clip again of From Scotland with Love, because the hair stood up on the back of my neck hearing that music again, because for me, the link that the marriage of that musician and that music with those images is now the new reality of those films for me in their own way. I just think it works really, really well, but it's not always successful.
Well, but it's also different, isn't it, to regular film scoring because regular film scoring is generally secondary and kind of commissioned activity, whereas you're all engaged in much more collaboration between different artistic practices. How does it, Nigel, for you, is there a difference in the different kinds of work, the different kinds of composing that you do?
Definitely. When you're writing, we write music, cinematic music, which we think might get used in documentaries and in film and TV. But when you're writing for silent film, that's your brief, and that dictates what you do, and you try not to do anything too Mickey Mouse. You try not to overplay it. So I've learned over the years to underscore rather than leave the space, create space, because that's often all that you need. So just maybe a bit of sound design rather than a score of music. But also with the Mitchell and Kenyon thing, what was an interesting development was we took the tram footage of Sheffield, and on a project which got showed at a university festival in Sheffield, we took that footage from the Edwardian period, then historical tram footage in Sheffield, and then academics at the university interviewed local people about their memories of the tram system in Sheffield and the routes, and their memories about how they got around the city, because a lot of the tram routes have been changed or are not there anymore. And then we put together we got a filmmaker to make a short film using all that footage and modern footage of the modern trams, put it all together with the people's recollections, and it made a really nice document of. It was called In the Tracks of Memory, so it's a really interesting way of bringing together an archive, new filmmakers, new composers.
Tracks. I like what you're doing. Alison, when you're commissioning composers and musicians who might not have worked with silent film before, what are the tensions there?
Well, I think you have to be very, like I said in the little talk at the beginning, looking out for people who already approach their music like storytelling is my way in, because I'm not a musician, so I'm not able to speak the language about how to compose. I can't tell somebody how to compose, but if I get the sense that somebody is already telling stories through their music, I think that's a really good sign. And then just asking people to think about what's the film saying, not necessarily what did you call it, clowning or
Mickey Mouse.
So, you know, you don't want a musician to think that they have to be literal, and so they're trying to fill up a gap where a contemporary, you know, a sound recorded film would be operating. You're not doing that. You're operating at an underscoring level, giving gaps, like you say, helping the audience to understand the relationships between the characters, and the themes and the feelings, and it just, yeah, it's not. I don't think it's not everyone's within everyone's abilities.
I mean, certainly when I was first doing From Scotland with Love, I mean, the reason that I decided to collaborate with King Creosote is that I'd listened to a lot of his music, and and he is a natural storyteller, but he's got a really sort of quirky sense of humour, and he approaches things in quite an oblique way. And I thought that would really work because, I mean, the last thing you want is the music to be actually telling the same story as the images. So you need the music to be at an oblique angle to the images somehow, so that both of them are actually communicating at their most potential, if you like.
But the images themselves aren't. They're not simply illustrative, or they're oblique. They're about, you're telling a story of things. You're telling a story about abstract things like memory and experience, and that must work from your direction as well. Your comments and questions don't have to be astute. They can they can be anything. But has anyone got anything they'd like to say? It was about the kind of curating process, I think, or how the project begins. Does it begin with a film, or does it begin with maybe sometimes it begins with a context?
Yeah, or the nature of the festival. So it's about the creation process. I think the majority of times it would start with the selection of films. Like we wanted to do the Mitch and Kenyon collection ones, which were pertinent to Sheffield and surrounding areas. So once we knew we had that collection of films, we then put out the call for commissions, chose 2 composers. So it was, because it was so site-specific, the films dictated, the nature of the films dictated what we then did, and the process we took.
And have you ever had an experience where you've had a good idea but had to drop that idea because the film material doesn't exist, or something?
I'm kind of in the middle.
Or do you always have very good ideas?
Bad idea.
Lots of great ideas had to be parked over the years.
Yes.
Not necessarily archiving music, but.
Well, talking of difficulties and challenges, obviously with archive film, rights and screening material are a big challenge. Like, you might see the greatest film on a ropey old copy on YouTube, and then there's no good screening material, or you can't clear the rights, or you could clear the rights if you had an extra couple of thousands or whatever. So that's one of the issues. But to answer your question, for me it depends. It depends which way around. So with Annie Laurie, that was a film I really wanted to present at our festival, and it was a case of finding the best musician to approach to do that, and Shona Mooney was the name that I came up with, and happily she agreed. But the other way around, when you start with the musicians, so Moishe Spiegel, as I said, I knew I wanted to work with them, or Herschel 36, and that was a case of pairing the film that seemed to go best with their approach, their musical approach. So it depends.
Someone rang me up once and asked if they wanted to do live score to films by the Quay brothers. So I rang up the Quay brothers, and they said, no, they can fuck off and practice on someone else. And I think with artists, with sort of artist films like that, there's a sense, well, the person made the film. They might not have written the soundtrack themselves, but they considered the soundtrack, and that's how it exists. I wonder if it's the same with whether those same kind of questions ought to be considered with feature films. But have you had that? Well, you have. You told us about not exactly a film with an existing soundtrack, but
a pre-commissioned one. Yeah, I mean, at the moment I'm working on a project, but it's kind of, it's a bit delicate at the moment, but when the filmmaker's still alive, I think it's a case of getting in touch and just, if you're going to respect the film, and I mean, the Quay brothers weren't interested, but it might be that if you can speak to the original creators of the film and persuade them that you're going to take good care of their work and represent it, then it's always worth asking.
Yes. I mean, I think, a rights holder is a rights holder. They can say yes or they can say no, but you can always ask.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same with archive, wanting to use pieces of archive.
Did you use Nightmare in your film? Did you use Nightmare?
No, I mean, there was one source of archive from Scotland with Love, which I ideally wanted to use, and it was owned by somebody who didn't actually shoot it and had really very little to do with the actual creation of this material, but I happened to own it, and he would not let this. He just won't let this archive be used in films, and you just come across that, and you just have to accept it. It's a real shame because it's kind of crazy. But
and was there a reason?
Just bloody mindedness, I think. Well, I think. Yeah, I mean, the thing about making films from archive is that, a lot of it's to do with what you find, and a lot of things, you can find completely by accident when you're looking for something else, and that can change. It can be incredibly exciting if you suddenly discover something. Because, I mean, an archive, is only as sort of able to be used to the extent that it's been well catalogued or tagged or so that you can actually find things, and sometimes things just remain buried away because they weren't noted at the time, and then if you suddenly come across them, then it's an absolute, it's really, really exciting moment. But yeah, obviously when you're making these films, it's very much shaped by what was filmed, who filmed it, whether it's been preserved, whether it's been catalogued. The whole thing is quite a sort of gamble in a way.
But do you find yourselves, trawling through the archive that you've got because you know there's an image that you want in your head that might be there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you decide on the themes of your film, and then you do go and. I mean, I particularly trawled the archive for images of women, for example, because I wanted to, as a sort of feminist filmmaker, I wanted to bring women's. Scottish women's into the frame. So there was, and I think obviously these films are very much shaped by the the vision of the filmmaker and the composer that they're collaborating. They're not any kind of accurate record of. They're very much shaped by their creator's vision. When you're discussing what composer to work with, I'm about to do a new film, another film, and we have been talking about, because, I mean, from Scotland with Love, the audience, majority of the audience is an older audience. There's just no getting away from that. I mean, had we used a completely different musician or composer, I don't know whether that would have shifted the whole demographic of the audience. I mean, actually, the film plays very well to young people when they get to see it, but it's obviously not a natural thing that they would come and see. So, yeah, the question of, you obviously bring, very different music to archive films than...
Yeah, our approach with silent film has always been to do a more modern, not always modern, we use traditional instruments, but more electronic and analogue, modern approach to scoring, so to try and attract a new audience. But I was just thinking that because a number of the films that we work with have come out on DVDs, and you have the option of having multiple soundtrack options, and I think we're probably letting cat out of the bag a bit here, but it'd be great to have an audience in a cinema watching a film, but having wireless headphones and listen to different soundtracks, and then it'd be great discussion afterwards. You can say, well, which score did you listen to, and how did you interpret the film? So I've given that one away. You can have that.
We try to introduce different styles. I mean, but I suppose it's within quite a narrow range, really. But folk with Annie Laurie, and electronica with Wunder der Schöpfung, and then there's the sort of subgenre of contemporary silent film pianists and so on. But for the first time, don't tell anyone, but we're working with a Chinese film musician and Chinese film. And I'm really interested in that idea of that we assume that a certain sound of music or certain notes or pitches or chords, you know, that's a happy chord and that's a sad chord and so on, or a scary, but how culturally specific is that? And if we all, you know, went to Asia and listened to silent film with different musicians scoring it, you know, would they be using a completely different cultural musical language? I think, yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know what the answer is. I'm also interested actually in the question of anachronism and where that sits, you know, whether the film music has to be from the era.
My boss has messaged me to say that someone has tweeted that apparently the panel is entertaining. She read it on Twitter, so it must be true. So thank you to whoever that was. There's a drink at the art school. You can get tickets for Wunder der Schöpfung, which will be your cinematic highlight of the year. And it's the end of the year. And thank you, Virginia, Nigel, and Alison. And thank you.
Thank you.